Hello again, and thank you for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather on this first day of February 2019. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first here, we've got high wind warning continues out here for the Juneau, Douglas, Admiralty Island areas through tonight, actually through 9 p.m. Saturday, and that's for continued gusty winds in excess of or above 75 miles an hour throughout this time period. And then wind chill advisory continues up toward White Pass, Skagway until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and that's for wind chills 50 below zero with those gusty north winds and cold air coming down out of the Yukon, actually across all of the southeast coast, but with coldest wind chills up in this area, strongest winds through Lynn Canal on down in toward even some pretty gusty winds down in toward like Five Finger Lighthouse to the south, but not quite as strong as up in the warning area. Otherwise, back to the west, we've got winter storm warnings out for the lower Yukon Valley, Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, and the Bering Strait coast, southern Seward Peninsula, looks like the Nome area, all the way around to Shishmaref and Selawik Valley, Kotzebue, right up the northwest coast there to Point Hope. And that's for whiteout conditions at times, or at least the several inches of snow coming in this weekend, and winds gusting 45 miles an hour. That'll create whiteout conditions, or at least visibilities a quarter mile or less throughout at times. And then a winter storm watch is out here for the greater Galena area and the Kobuk Valley, Ambler, and the other locations there. That's kicks into effect for tomorrow night through Sunday, and that's for winter storm-like conditions. Again, 40-mile-an-hour winds, snow blowing snow, possible whiteout conditions there. But that's just a possibility at this point, just a watch. Otherwise, winter weather advisories either side of this watch area, up across the Brooks Range for gusty winds here with central and east side there for blowing snow to reduce visibilities to half mile or less. Same sort of thing going on here over the upper Yukon Valley, Koyukuk Valley down in toward Tanana, winter weather advisories, snow blowing snow and gusty winds will reduce visibilities at times to a half mile or less. And the same sort of thing going on here for the Seward Peninsula areas. On down toward Unalakleet, gusty winds to 40 miles an hour today already at Unalakleet. And otherwise, much lighter winds elsewhere. Started to pick up a little bit with that first front along the southwest coast. And moving on to looking at the winds, Naked Island and Little Island here in the Panhandle on the northern side there, the northern portion in toward the Lynn Canal area had wind gusts to 90 miles per hour today, peak wind gusts. Rocky Island, a little farther to the south, 80 mile per hour wind gusts. Out to the west in the Aleutians, pretty good front brought 66 mile an hour peak wind gusts to Adak with about 1.25 inches of rain in the 12-hour period ending at 3 p.m. this afternoon. And that's a peak gust they had, at least the last time I looked, was at 66 miles per hour. It may go higher than that. And then Eldred Rock, 63 miles per hour, farther up Lynn Canal. They may have had stronger wind gusts than that. It looked pretty hit and miss on the observations today. And moving on to satellite imagery, here's the first front in a series of about 3 or so that's going to affect the state here over the weekend. This one really breaking up as it approaches the coast, but still 63 mile an hour wind gusts at Cape Newenham earlier today with that. And then the gusty winds, Unalakleet, snow spreading into the St. Lawrence Island area this afternoon, extending back southwestward. Really nothing significant in the way of any snow amounts with this first system, but snow making its way into King Salmon this afternoon. High clouds, Kodiak Island, thickening and lowering mid and high level clouds there. Cirrus at about 20,000 feet here, spreading up across Cook Inlet, and then thin cirrus scattering out up in toward the Tanana Valley. Clear and cold below zero up to the north here. And then this area cloudiness right up in here, that's kind of due to the outflow winds coming down from the north here over the eastern North Gulf Coast. As it comes out, picks up moisture, and actually a little bit of a weak low pressure area forms there due to the rising motion of the convective nature with the cold air coming out over the comparatively warmer water. Anyway, the strong winds here over the southeast coast accompanied by clear skies and colder temperatures. And rolling this through again, you can see just bands of cirrus coming up with this. Really, this is not as strong or as potent as it looks, or definitely as it was 24 hours ago yesterday when it's farther back to the west. But there's a band of light snow with it here pushing northeastward. And also a little bit of moisture starting to develop off just south of the Kenai Peninsula. Bring a chance of snow showers tonight to the southern Kenai Peninsula, possibly into southern Prince William Sound, but won't make any northward progression. Stronger system out here to the west. Low pressure pushing up toward Shemya today with a front, again, bringing the strong winds and the heavier rains in toward Adak today. Rain just making its way to St. George and St. Paul. St. George seeing winds on the increase, gusting about 47 miles an hour this afternoon. And pushing that along, you can see narrow break here between this dying front and the next system back out here to the west that will sort of make landfall later tonight. But for today, we had some blowing snow developing. Not too serious yet. St. Lawrence Island and areas of light snow back along the southwest coast. Weak low here south of Kodiak, but really all the moisture back to the west. And then the stronger system out here just pulling north of Amchitka Island, 968 millibar low, bringing those 60 to 75 mile an hour wind gusts to central Aleutians with storm force winds and the rain heavy at times along with it. Some dense fog up along the Arctic coast. Wainwright had visibilities down to a quarter mile in dense fog and haze this afternoon. Otherwise, patchy fog, not quite as bad here along the remainder of the Arctic coast. Really not a bad day up there. And then the strong winds, you can see very tight gradient here over the northern southeast coast and not so tight down to the south. So consequently, you had 30, 40 mile an hour wind gusts on the southern panhandle versus the 90 mile per hour gusts they had throughout Lynn Canal and some of the channel areas up to the north. Light snow made its way westward into the Stewart and Hyder area, but amounts were quite light. Taking a look at the forecast for tonight, no change here with the panhandle, still with a wind warning tonight through tomorrow until tomorrow evening with the lighter winds to the south and cold temperatures. Cold over the eastern and northern interior. Still pretty chilly here, south central Alaska. Just variable clouds. That first front really falling apart as it pushes eastward into mainly the upper level ridge, really weakening that considerably. And it's also having a weakening effect on the ridge, which is starting to slip off to the east a little bit. Otherwise, look for increasing snow showers from the Barren Islands along the southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula. Montague Island, maybe Cordova, I wouldn't expect much at all there, and it should stay along or off the coast. It'll be dry for Kodiak Island. Isolated snow showers, leftover moisture from the first front. Pretty insignificant here, Kuskokwim Valley down in toward northern Bristol Bay. So the snow will be ending here for King Sam and Igigik and drying out for the Alaska Peninsula. Rain, gusty winds until the front pushes through the Pribilofs. Snow blowing, snow winter storm warning here, Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island areas, and then increasing winds resulting in the winter weather advisories over the interior here, Dalton, Steese highways, and scattered showers, really not too widespread out over the Aleutians with milder southwest winds, keeping definitely temperatures above freezing, and rain for the eastern Aleutians, rain for the Pribilofs. And for tomorrow, that warm sector pushes northward, so look for the temperatures to rise and should be a mixture of precipitation. First over the Kuskokwim Delta, eventually into the Yukon Delta. There could be some areas of freezing rain to go along with that. Otherwise, snow and blowing snow northwest back to the northwest coast and into the Chukchi Sea, St. Lawrence Island there, right on the front. Blowing snow for the Brooks Range, dry over the interior and cold with a lot less wind. And then the chance of showers now lifting a little farther to the north, may catch Cordova, Cape Yakataga. Kenai Peninsula could see some scattered rain and snow showers here, but nothing significant. Stays windy here across the southeast coastal areas. The winds look like they'll peak late tonight and then start to edge their way down, but the warning out through 9 p.m. tomorrow night. And moving on to the forecast for Sunday, snow in the interior here, areas of all the way up to the eastern, or all of the Arctic coast here with rain, Kodiak and Bristol Bay. A lot less wind, but still sunny for the panhandle. Moving into the lows tonight, 25 to 40 below eastern interior. Warming around Bristol Bay, highs tomorrow afternoon, 15 to 25 below over the eastern interior. Mid-30s now, pushing up into the Yukon Delta, the Kuskokwim Delta, St. Lawrence Island. And then lows still cold over the panhandle Sunday morning, 40 below for the upper Yukon Valley for the lows. Milder back to the west and southwest, and the highs warmest in the southwest, coldest in the northeast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
IFR pushing right into the southwest coast tomorrow with that next front holding together a little better there. So IFR from St. Lawrence Island all the way down to Togiak Bay. Marginal VFR just barely making it to the western Alaska range here. VFR over Copper River Basin, Cook Inlet, all the way up to the Arctic coast and down across the Panhandle. And those offshore winds keep this marginal VFR off the coast through the day tomorrow and probably through the weekend here for the Panhandle. Stays nice over the eastern interior. IFR starting to show up tomorrow afternoon there in the Gulf of Alaska, just south of Montague Island, with IFR edging in across Bristol Bay northward to the northwest coast. And that becomes a little more extensive here and expands up to along the southern slopes of the Brooks Range for Sunday morning. Staying VFR here over the eastern interior areas. IFR hanging on to the Gulf of Alaska here. It looks like maybe some marginal VFR trying to work up into Prince William Sound. Definitely conditions deteriorating here over south central Alaska. And that continues into the afternoon here. Moisture, IFR, possibly pushing into the Susitna Valley, definitely the Kuskokwim Valley, all the way back to the west of St. Matthew Island, northward. St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait in the northwest areas, a narrow area of VFR clinging to the eastern interior. Stays VFR for the southeast coast. IFR from Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula all the way to Atka, northward again to St. Lawrence Island, better back to the west. And for passes, Anatuvik looking good. VFR tomorrow, same forecast for Adigan. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, occasional marginal VFR, possibly trending a little better in the afternoon. That first front really breaking up as it pushes into the upper ridge. And rainy, could be marginal at times tomorrow, really not all that bad. It's kind of touch and go in those conditions. And for windy though, VFR, easy for Isabel and Mentasta, both those passes VFR, eastern Alaska range. And for Tanita, VFR tomorrow. Portage also VFR, at least for one more day. And Chilkoot and White, VFR through the weekend. Freezing levels here with that Arctic outbreaking. Of course, surface all the way down tomorrow morning to the south side of the Queen Charlottes with 2,000 feet off the chart, but back to the west here under southerly and southwest flow, 2,000 to 4,000 feet right up along the southwest coast, 6,000 feet for the Alaska Peninsula. Icing with that moisture in the front coming in, a little hanging together a little better. There'll be areas of considerable moderate here in these orange shaded areas from the northwest coast all the way down toward the Fox Islands. Above about 7,000 feet here in the south and roughly about 5,000 in the north, and an area of mixed icing out here over the western Aleutians, mostly above 5,000 feet. Otherwise, no icing expected, of course, over the eastern interior under upper high pressure and the southeast coast. Too dry for any icing there, that's for sure. And for the jet stream, sharp upper level ridge midday tomorrow right up through the central and eastern interior areas, gradually shifting eastward, but still tomorrow we have that good northerly flow at about 80 knots coming down along the eastern North Gulf Coast. That'll keep it windy over the Panhandle, especially in the north, and then southerly flow out here 100 to 130 knots with that next front holding together better as the entire pattern shifts eastward, and that'll allow more moisture in as this shifts off to the east on Sunday. And for 9,000 feet tomorrow, 35 to 45, maybe 55 here for the Aleutians. Good southwest flow, 50 knots right into the southwest coast. Southerlies at 50, St. Lawrence Island into the Bering Strait. Lighter here under high pressure over the eastern interior. And about 15 to 25 central western Arctic coast. Switching direction a little bit here for the Panhandle. North to northwest, 25 to 40 knots there. And lighter over toward the eastern border there. And about 20 to 25 here in the Gulf of Alaska. 15 knots there for south central Alaska, western Copper River Basin. And at 3,000 feet, 20 to 30 knot northerlies here for the southeast coast. Lighter into the Gulf of Alaska, just 10 knots there for Prince William Sound. 10 to 15 here over the eastern interior. And then increasing pretty good here as you head west. Southwest flow 40 to 45 into the southwest coast and Kuskokwim Valley. Falling back to 20 to 25, turning more southerly over the central interior. But St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait, Seward Peninsula, south 40 knots. 25 to 40 knots over the eastern Bering Sea. 35 to 40 knots over the central and western Aleutians. Turbulence, considerable moderate chop, especially for small aircraft below 4,000 feet from the Brooks Range to Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, all of the Aleutians, and of course mechanical turbulence continues, possibly severe over the northern Panhandle through tomorrow afternoon. After the break, I'll be back with the marine forecasts.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet, and some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes.
Okay.
Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. Okay. It's called the highly elliptical orbit.
Oh, that sounds
it's interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work.
Sure.
Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse.
Okay.
And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical.
The foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part.
Yes.
Ends. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes.
Okay.
We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes.
Okay.
That thing is moving.
Fast.
It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker
like
here.
Sputnik there. Yeah.
There it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator.
Okay.
So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over?
Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right?
So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go...
Kind of like a racetrack.
Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that when you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real advantage of. Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here, it's going to be close to the Earth. It's going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. The satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska and the high Arctic. And then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower. It has to. That's the laws of motion. And such like that, repeating.
Wow.
Now the real important way to make this work is you have to have two satellites. So that
Okay.
while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a constant frame of reference,
Right.
and you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska, and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long-range view that's looking top-down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. And again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at Dehne, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis, really not a lot of difference from yesterday here, coming out of Kuskokwim Bay and then back to the northwest. Still ice around St. Matthew Island, and the forecast is for it to retreat a significant amount here over the next 5 days. In fact, that the winds could see some of the shore-fast ice along the west coast pulling offshore. Moving on, coastal water forecasts here along the Panhandle, south coast, northeast 25, seas 8 to 9 feet, northeast 20 to 30 on the north coast with 8-foot seas. Lynn Canal, northeast 40, gusts 60 knots tomorrow, and northeast 35, still gales, Stevens Passage. Small craft advisories there for Clarence Strait. Outlook for Sunday, lighter winds, especially out here along the coast, southeast 15 to 20 on the north coast, north 15 to 20 south coast. Still looking at gales, at least early in the day here, especially for Lynn Canal, north 35 knots. And losing the storm force gusts, though, in Stevens Passage, northeast 35. And then Clarence Strait, northwest at 20 with 4-foot seas. Prince William Sound, light northeast breeze tomorrow, seas 2 feet, and northeast at 10 for Cook Inlet. South of the Forelands, though, small craft advisories, northeast winds 25 knots, right into Kamishak Bay. Barren Islands, northeast 15, easterlies 15 for the North Gulf Coast with 6 to 7-foot seas. And then for Sunday, east 15 there in the Sound with 3-foot seas, northeast 15 here, northern Cook Inlet, northeast 20, southern Cook Inlet, southeast 25 now for Kamishak Bay. Winds pick up Sunday over what they'll be tomorrow here for the Barren Islands, south 25 knots, south to southeast 20 knots for the North Gulf Coast. And Kodiak Island, pretty light winds on the east side here at 10 knots from the south, and then northeast 15 Shelikof Straits, Ganacta Castle Cape, south 20. Alaska Peninsula, south 30 knots, seas 12 to 19 feet, southeast 25 for the Bristol Bay, 25 knots southeast winds, 6-foot seas. And then for Sunday, southwest 20 for Bristol Bay, Bering Sea side of the peninsula, southwest 15, and south 25 here from Cape Sarachev right up to Sitkinak and then on up the east side of Kodiak and Fognak Islands, south 20 for Shelikof Strait. Western Aleutians tomorrow, southwest 35 to 40 knots with 23-foot seas. Southwest winds, but lighter, small craft advisories, Adak and Atka with 25 to 30 knot winds there, seas up to 23 feet. And gales here, south side of the Fox Islands, small craft advisories on the north side, south to southwest, 25 to 35. And then for Sunday, those come down considerably, southeast 10 to 15, especially for Unalaska Island. Small craft advisory south-southeast 25 to 30, Adak and Atka. And then way out west, gales, southwest 35, 24-foot seas. And for the southwest coast tomorrow, South winds 30 knots. That's what's going to push that ice edge back to the north. And then southwest 20 for the Pribilof, seas near 20 feet. South 30 knots here, St. Matthew Island. And south 40 for St. Lawrence Island. Southeast 30 for Norton Sound. And for Sunday, small craft advisory, southerly winds, St. Lawrence Island down to the North Shore, Nunivak Island, southwest 15 south of the island. Southerlies at 20 for the Pribilof, seas still up around 12 feet, and 30-knot winds with 16-foot seas for St. Matthew Island. Eastern Boulevard Sea Coast, 15 to 20-knot easterlies, strongest there toward Demarcation Point, east 15 for the central and west side. And then from Cape Beaufort, gales from there on down to Wales for 35 to 40-knot winds right out of the east. Those drop off and change direction. Southeast 20 here for the southern, or for the Chukchi Sea. Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, southeast 25. So brisk wind advisories there. Otherwise, everywhere else, pretty light 10 to 15-knot winds, mostly from the south. For tonight again, clear and cold, anywhere from 25 to 40 below here for the lows in the interior, especially the eastern interior areas down Copper River Basin. High wind warning continues. Juneau, Admiralty Island, Douglas, those areas gusts in excess of 75 miles an hour. Less wind down south, but dry, cold temperatures, and chance of snow showers developing along the southern Kenai Peninsula coast. And then this storm, winter storm warnings, Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, and rain and wind for the Pribilofs, and rain moving into the eastern Aleutians. Tomorrow that pushes northeastward. Warm air carries a mixture of precipitation right up eventually into the Yukon Delta. Snow and blowing snow, Seward Peninsula back to the northwest. Rain to the south, dry and cold to the east here, and still windy in the Panhandle, but those drop off somewhat the next day, but sunshine continues. Chance of snow through the central and northern interior. That's a look at the weather. Thanks so much for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.